Okay, so today we are going to discuss about JSPs, which stand for Java Server Pages. Okay, so if you remember our previous interaction, the way in which the UI is to work was, or the web application is to work was that the presentation logic we used to put in the JSP. Okay, uh, the most of the business logic would be there in the servlets. All right. So this will make sure that there's a difference between the presentation the presentation logic which we have and the business logic which we have. So presentation, when you say, basically stands for what you see on the UI, right? So if you hit, say, if you enter any particular URL, maybe if you're trying to do shopping and you go to Amazon, now if you just type www.amazon.com, there are various things which you see on the UI, right? Something on the left is there, something below is there. It displays some of the common products as well for you to buy. So the number of stuff are available there, and the page is designed in a particular way. Now, just think for a moment that you, as a developer, belong to the team which handles this web application, and you have to work on the that you have to work on the UI and also on the backend portion, and 3 or 4 of you are assigned to work on such a project. So, if you are doing so and you write the UI part, now if you write everything using servlets, because using servlets you can write whatever is being shown on the UI as well, right? You get the response object. Using that, you can go ahead and write everything, write all the exact HTML and everything which is there. So now if you see, if you write everything like that, uh, the servlet code will become very cumbersome, very messy, because everything is in one place. And the web page requires some specific skills as well, right? So there are web developers who work on writing such or developing such UIs, and if they also have to write, then they will have to understand servlets and write it in a proper way. And the people who work on the core business logic, they'll also have to work or understand the web development part. So this leads to a lot of very close interaction, very close coupling between the presentation and the business logic, and that's why it was thought that if we have something in the market which mostly is presentation, okay, so which mostly is HTML tags, but if some business logic or some dynamic data has to be introduced, it supports tags, or in some other way it supports the introduction of those dynamic data, then that would be good. And there came the answer. The answer was JSP. All right. JSP stands for Java Server Pages. All right, and it is used to serve the dynamic page content. Okay. So after the servlet is done, the servlet sets appropriate things. It forwards the control and says that please render this particular JSP. And once such a thing is done, the JSP is compiled, and the result is out there. The result, wherever the dynamic tags or you wanted some dynamic code, it gets replaced in the original places, because for every request. So for a particular customer, if you are going to log in, the dynamic data is going to be different. For me, it is going to be different. So we inject different data on the basis of the dynamic content which is required, and this dynamic page content is served using JSPs. Okay, so similar to JSPs, we have ASP as well. ASP is not related to what we are studying. ASP is in .NET, and it stands for Active Server Pages, but it has the same functionality, the same rule as JSP. So let's go back. So this is what we're going to discuss today. This is the course content. JSP stands for Java Server Pages. JSP helps to bind dynamic and static pages together. This is what I was explaining below. Static content can be developed using HTML, but the dynamic content has to be injected from the business logic being executed in the application. To retrieve the dynamic content in the code, GSP technology provides tags which we can use. If required, you can also execute the piece of Java code from within a GSP. So GSP finally provides you, in one way or the other, a way to introduce dynamic content, whether it is by using tags or by writing Java code, but it provides such ways. Now, if you go back to HTML, HTML has tags, but those tags are not GSP tags. Those tags are not able to introduce dynamic content to you, right? And moreover, you can't write Java code in your HTML file, right? So all these things are out there, and JSP finally gets compiled into a servlet. So JSP, once you compile it, so once it's loaded for the first time, uh, so once it's loaded for the first time, uh, it gets compiled into a servlet. So when you try to access it the next time, that servlet is directly accessed. The web container doesn't even try to access a .gsp file. It tries to access a servlet which is compiled. So the GSP translation which happens, translation meaning translating it from the GSP into servlet, it happens only once, not for every request. Okay, and once it translates into a servlet, every time a new request comes in, it is this servlet which serves. And if you know, servlet is a Java code, right? So wherever the dynamic content is required, it is replaced. So that's how it is. Now coming back to the JSP life cycle. Now for servlets also, if you remember, there are three methods, very common stuff, right? One was init, where you could have initialized, and then there was service method, from where we used to call do get, do post, do put, do delete, and then there was destroy towards the end. When the work is done, you destroy the servlet, you basically make it eligible for garbage collection. And the same life cycle is followed in the case of JSP as well. The first method is JSP init, the second one JSP service, and the third one JSP destroy. Now in JSP init we do some initialization if that is required. This is one time activity, okay, and once the initialization is done, the JSP or the corresponding servlet is ready to do the servicing. And when I say servicing, it means that it's ready to serve the requests, and it serves a request for many days, for a lot of time. As long as the application is up, and then maybe if the application shuts down or there is some other issue, the GSP destroy is called. So destroy is basically a graceful way to do the garbage collection, to free out the resources. It's a graceful way to give you an option to do some other work before the GSP can be finally destroyed. So this is how this is how the life cycle of a GSP is. So let's understand it further from this particular diagram. So the client, which basically is a browser, so we have the HTTP request, and when the request is first made and the web container has to act on it, it checks that if the request is asking for it to look into a JSP, or if the request is for a particular URL which goes to a servlet, and the servlet is trying to ask a particular JSP to be displayed, then in that case, a web container goes and checks if the JSP, if this is the first request for the JSP, or has the JSP changed. So if it is the first request, the JSP has to be compiled, right? And if the JSP has changed, the JSP has to be recompiled. So in these two scenarios, it goes towards the right, if you see the screen here, and tries to do some set of the activity. But if this is not the first set, if the JSP has not changed, or if the JSP has not changed, you go to the corresponding servlet. The servlet executes, it runs, and then it returns the response back to the browser. But if this is the first request, or if the JSP had changed, the JSP is first located and it's compiled. Okay, if there's compilation error, you do not know. You have to return the error back to the browser. But if the compilation or if the translation into the servlet was successful, all right, then the servlet is out there, and then the servlet instance is run, the servlet instance is created, and then the response is sent back. So this is on a high level how the JSP lifecycle works. So from the browser, when the request comes in, the web container forwards a request to the application. Application invokes a servlet. Servlet may load the JSP as a final response. JSPs in turn will have both the static and dynamic content. It will be returned to the browser, and the same is displayed to the end user. Alright. Now this is what I was explaining about JSP init, service, and destroy. So once a JSP is translated into a servlet, the container invokes the following lifecycle methods in the servlet that are defined, and here is the interface name javax.servlet.jsp.jsp page interface, and the three methods JSP init, JSP service, and JSP destroy. So JSP init is a method which is invoked when the servlet is first initialized. Service is invoked when the request of JSP is first received, and it keeps on receiving requests. It's not in the first time, it keeps on receiving requests. And JSP destroy is invoked before the servlet is removed from the service. Alright. Now let's go and see the structure of a JSP page. So we discussed that the JSP has static and the dynamic content. So how is the dynamic content introduced? Alright. So let's see that with a small example. So if you come and see here, this is a sample JSP page, and there are some cases, if like say HTML is there, the head, the title is there, then you have body, then you have some heading, and then if you see here, this is a piece of portion where you need to put some attention. So we are trying to create an object here, right? We are trying to create an instance of the class java.util.date, which is another way to say that we are creating an object. So once we create an object, in the next line we are trying to display the time in milliseconds. So the time in milliseconds is, and then again we are using a tag here, all right, and then we are displaying the time in milliseconds, and it ends, and the entire HTML page ends. So if we come and see here, these tags, less than sign, percentage, or percentage greater than sign, they are the boundaries within which you can go ahead and write your Java code. Alright. So either you can write one or two or many lines, whatever is required within such tags. And such codes are called as scriptlets. Alright. They are called as scriptlets, and such code starts with this. You write number of lines, all right, and then it ends with this. Now this is one way where you have to introduce number of items. Now say if you only have to display a particular value, like in this case where we are using time in milliseconds is, so in this case you have to use just a less than symbol, percentage, equal to, give the value which you want to be displayed, and then end the tag. So this is a second way where you actually use it like this. Then you give the value which you want. I will just write it as expression. Okay. Now coming back here, now there are two things. The third thing is like this. So if this is just a comment, if you remember, the Java code will go within such tags. But in the same tag, if you go here and put like this, it means that you require. Sorry, this was wrong from my part. That's why I was confused. So this was required from, true. So whenever you write like this, This means that such things can be used for comments. All right. So you can give your comments out here. So any comment, like say in my case, I've given sample JSP. You put it here, right? And such like this one, this is called as directive. This is not exactly a Java code, but this is used to define some page level settings. All right, and that is introduced using this one. All right, so let's go back and see some theory, and that will help you to understand this in a better way. So JSP page consists of regular HTML tags representing the static content and the code enclosed within tags representing the dynamic content. And the start of the tag is represented by, as I explained, less than bracket, percentage, and it ends with percentage greater than bracket. The scripting and directive elements are written within the symbols. The scripting element consists of Java code snippets, while directives are used to define the specifications for the entire JSP page. So if I come back here, this is what they're referring as directives, all right, and this whatever you write within these blocks, where you can write one expression or the entire Java code, that is uh, that is Java level code. So that is called as scripting. So we have two things: scripting elements and directive elements. So the scripting element consists of Java code snippets, where directives are used to define the specifications, right? And the following JSP code displays the server time on the browser. It contains, and this is the same code which we are looking into. It contains the HTML content and the dynamic content placed separately within respective tags. So we see here, and the tags which I explained, these are HTML tags. They are outside. I mean, they are not within these boundaries. They are outside. And wherever you have to introduce dynamic content, you start with those symbols, those tags, and write it out. All right. Rest everything is presentation. So, so you got it right. So this is how the presentation and the business logic is coming together in case of JSPs. Now, if you would have if you would have paid attention, I was just saying 5 minutes back that JSPs are compiled into servlets. So servlet is the ultimate thing which is going to serve a request, but JSP is for the ease of the development, where you display how your pages has to appear in a normal HTML way, so that the web developer can also work on it, and you can inject dynamic content into it, so that the web design so that the web the business logic developer, he knows and goes how to modify some of the tags to make it dynamic, and then that page you include in your code. But the server in the back end, when it tries to load the JSP for the first time, it generates a servlet out of it, which contains every code which is required for a normal server to serve the HTTP request, and this caters to the request till the time the JSP is in service. Once it is out of service, JSP destroy is called for graceful execution, for graceful termination of the program, and then the entire thing ends. All right. So this was a case of JSP being translated into servlet, but still there is a slight difference between JSP and servlet. Like say when you have an application, this flexibility has been given to us by the specification which has been provided for JSP, is that the JSP is placed in a particular location, right? So once it is placed and the first time it is initialized, the first time it is converted into servlet, and say tomorrow you think that this is not good, I want to replace it with some other web content or some other type of design, some other type of layout, you can go ahead and replace the JSP which you had from beforehand with the other JSP. And once you do that, if you see, go back and see the definition which we had here, like whatever we had thought of. The conditions are two. Even if the JSP has changed, the web container does a recompilation of the JSP, and it is converted back into a new servlet. So once a new servlet is available, all right. So once a new servlet is available, that servlet is willing to serve the request. Okay, so that servlet will serve the request with the new code, whatever changes you have done on the basis of adding more dynamic content or adding some style about the layouts. this will get reflected in the servlet and there correspondingly and thereby in the response which you send back to the client. Okay, so JSPs, whenever you make a change to it, it gets recompiled. That is not the case of servlets. Servlets do not. I mean, once it is out there, you have to redeploy the code. It doesn't automatically get replaced. That you go in one place, replace .java file with the servlet, the new servlet which you have, my servlet, and it gets recompiled into a .class file. That doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen. So there are some major differences the way in which JSPs and servlets work, and there are some subtle differences. But if you see right behind the back, they both are same. So ultimately, the GSPs are servlets, but it's a very good way to give you an option to go ahead and uh, separate the way in which the web designer and the web developer will work. Web designer is the one who works on showing how the page should work, and he'll use this HTML tags, and wherever the data has to be displayed, he'll put the data directly, maybe hard coded. And you, as a web developer or a business logic developer, will go there and see that these hard coded values have to be replaced with some values from the server, and it has to be replaced with a corresponding corresponding tag. You either replace it with some scripting elements or some JSP tags. All right. So this is what we have, the difference between JSPs and servlets, and let's read it through it and then we'll understand in a much better way. So servlets tie up files, HTML for static content and Java file for dynamic content to independently handle the static presentation logic and the dynamic business logic. So servlets can have HTML tags separately, it can have Java files separately, or it can have everything in one code, which makes it very messy, because it has other code as well, like out.println. Then you start with the double quotes, and then you give the details, and then you end it, and then you keep on doing such things for a number of times. So this is, I mean, cumbersome. This is prone to error, right? The second one is, in any JSP change is automatically recompiled into a servlet, but any change in servlet requires deployment. And this is what we're discussing for last 5 minutes. So servlet programming requires web page designer and developer to work together. Since both the contents go in the same file, JSP on the other hand gives developers and designers to work independently and then combine the work together later. Okay. Now coming back to what are the various components of the JSP page. So we have seen a sample JSP page, right? So if you see the sample JSP page, you will understand that it has some of the uh, components. On high level, you can distinguish or differentiate the components into three parts. One is so I mean, here we basically not three components. Here we're discussing about directives. So basically, we have three directives. One is page directive, one is tag lift directive, and one is include directive. So a directive element, okay, in a GSP page provides global information about a particular GSP. Okay. Now, if you go to the like say, let's go back to the old example here. So how do we write a directive? So as explained, the directive starts like this. It's supposed to have add as well, and then it ends like a normal scripting element which is there. But whatever is within such tags is supposed to be a directive, and there are many directives. One is page directive, tag lift directive, and other directives. So page directive is denoted like this. All right, you will have page here, and this gives you the opportunity to define some of the items at the page level, like the way in which they are defining here. Page language is equal to Java, okay, and yeah, page language is equal to Java. If it was tag lib, there is a different value which you give here. I mean, it's tag lib, and then you have include as well. So include does something else. So we'll see that later. Alright, so there are three directives. One is page directive, tag lib directive, and include directive. The page directive, as I explained, it denotes about the general settings of the page. This is how you denote it. Alright, and there are various attributes. One of the attributes is language, which you mentioned as Java. You can mention other languages as well, so that the web container below knows which language to use to translate the code which you are writing within the scriptlets. So apart from language, there are other attributes as well which you can use. They are like such as extends. If this JSP is extending a particular class, then you have import, right? And the import is when, like say in a Java file, you import some classes, right? The other classes which are there. The same thing can be done in JSP as well. So if you want to import something, you can go ahead and put import statements. And the way to use import statements is that you have the directive, the page directive, which gives you number of attributes, and one of the attributes is import, and you can use it for importing the packages or the classes which you want. Okay, then you have session. Then you have session means that whether this JSP should maintain session or not. Then you have some other like buffer, autoflush, whether the thread is safe, whether this particular JSP is thread safe or not, or if there is some error which happens in this page, to which error page we should direct the response to, or whether this page itself is an error page or not. And if it is an error page, there is this explicit object, error object, which denotes java.lang.throwable. So if you remember catch and the exception handling things which we discussed, we had try catch block, right? So let me go back and explain this way. It works as a refresher for you, and it's not difficult. So this is what we discussed in one of the earlier Java classes which we were having, that we have this try and catch block, and inside the catch block we have exception, right? So this is how we write the exception, and then here we work on that exception, do whatever we want to do. The exception is one of the base classes. The very basic class is throwable. So you have throwable, which is either for exception, okay, or error. There are two classes which extend from throwable. So throwable is a very basic, the top class, and that is denoted by the error here. So it basically means that the error object has access to the any type of error which has occurred in the page, okay, and it can use it. All right. Now let's go to the other directive, include directive. So if you have include directive, this page will be replaced with include in the declaration which you have. So the include directive is used to specify the name of the files to be first inserted in the compilation of the JSP page. So say the web page is very big. So if the top thing till here is only HTML, and towards the end you display only some dynamic content. So the idea is that you want to insert some statement, for towards the starting, and that set of statements can be put in a separate HTML file or whatever, maybe a JSP file, and someone else is working on it, right? Maybe a standalone web designer is working on it, he gave you that, and that has no dynamic content, you just want to insert it, that's why you do not even merge it in your code to avoid this round trip every time. So once you do that, once you go ahead and write it, you can use the include directive to include that page during compilation itself. So it gets included. Okay. So the include directive is used to specify the name of the files in the form of their relative URL to be inserted during the compilation of the JSP page. The content of the file thus included becomes part of the JSP page. The include directive can also be used to insert a part of the code that is common to the multiple pages. It's the same thing. Either it's the same code, which is a common code, or whether you have given it to a different web designer and he gives you a code. Any code which has to be inserted into JSP one time at the time of the compilation itself. Once it gets inserted, it becomes part of the JSP itself, and every time a JSP is requested, this insertion which has happened due to this in the code and include directive will always get rendered. Alright, so that is what the basic thing is. So the include directive can also be used to insert a part of the code that is common to the multiple pages, such as the header or the file which contains logo of the application. And this is how you write. I'll give an example as well here. Include file is equal to superstore.html. Okay. Now the next one is tag lib directive. So if you remember, HTML has tags. Alright, so it's not just plain text. Sometimes you have HTML tags. Alright, and one of the tags is like say you have HTML colon for And you have various other tags like this. So here, if some dynamic data is required, all right, and it is in a specific way, the idea is that why not use the tags? I mean, every time I go ahead, write that bracket thing, the percentage, and then write the code. I mean, it might not be possible. And there are some times where you like say you actually get data from the user, or you want to display something for which you want to execute a piece of Java code. Now that Java code either you will include directly in the JSP, or if there are a number of JSPs where the same Java code has to get executed, then you'll write that piece of code number of times, or in the worst case you'll go back and put that particular logic in a Java file in a particular method and always invoke it from all the JSPs. Alright, so this is fine. These are all different ways to work on it, but there is a very graceful way, that is that you define JSP tags, your own custom tags, or maybe you can use the one which is defined by JSP itself, the JSP specification itself. You can use that tag to create or use most of it. I mean, the standard work will get done. If you want any customization, you're free to go ahead and use the define the customized tag. Okay. Now, going back to what I've written here, the tagging directive imports a custom tag into the current JSP page. Custom tag is user defined tag which is used to perform repetitive tasks in a JSP page. The tag library descriptor, the TLD file, defines the functionality of a custom tag. So let's understand it in this way. So you have web.xml, right? And you have the code. So web.xml is the place where you define all the configurations for a web page. So on a similar line, the custom tag development for a JSP also works. So everything which you require, I mean the description, the configuration that is there in the TLD file, and then the actual classes are there which you have to extend a particular interface. And when you extend the interface, you have do start tag, do end tag, and once you do all those things, it your own tag library will get developed, and the way to access it we'll see later. But once the tag library is developed, you can use it to write your own code. So for example, if you see here, this is how you write taglib URI is taglib URI, prefix is prefix. Alright, so if this is the case, anywhere in the code, whatever is the prefix, if you give CS and using here CS colon input or whatever, if input is the taglib URI and prefix is CS, you can use CS colon input and use it anywhere in a JSP page. And maybe this accepts parameters as well. If it accepts parameters, the do start tag, do end tag code which you write in a custom tag, that should be capable of handling this particular parameter if you're giving. Let's say you just have to give the username, alright, and on the basis of the username it runs some database queries. So you can go ahead and do that, alright. So this is all about custom tags. Now coming to JSP scripting elements, alright. Now let's go towards it, like what things JSP provides for you to come up with the dynamic content. One is that if you write the symbols like this, if you notice here the extra uh, exclamation mark is there, alright. So if the extra exclamation mark is there, it means that, remember we used to define some of the attributes at the top in a class. The same thing can be done in JSP as well, as I've shown here, and these are called JSP declarations. So JSP declarations provide your mechanism to define variables and methods. Declarative statements are placed within, as we are showing here, and that's how it is being represented. So JSP expressions are used directly, and these expressions, like see, this is what we discussed earlier as well. So this is the way, this is used to directly insert values in the output. And if you want to write number of elements, then you have to write scriptlets like this. Here you don't have the equal to sign, and then you can write number of lines separated by semicolon, the way you write the Java code. So that is how it is done here. Now coming back to JSP implicit objects. Implicit objects are the objects which you do not have to create. Okay, so these objects are created by them, by the web container, and they're available for you to use it. You do not need to go ahead and create it. Okay,
So implicit objects are the objects which we do not have to create specifically but are available by default. So implicit objects, there are a number of objects which are implicit in case of JSP, such as application, config, exception, out, page, session, response, request, and page context. Out of such implicit objects, some objects are out there which are only implicit or only available in a certain case. So remember we are discussing about various attributes for page level directive, and one of the attributes was error page and is error page. So is error page denotes that whether this particular page is an error page which should be used by other pages or not. And if that is error page attribute is set to true, this exception object which is out here will be available on the page for you to use it. Maybe you just want to show the exception to the user, go ahead and do it. Or maybe you just want to log the exception in the log file, you can go ahead and do it. Or maybe you just want to store the exception in the uh, uh, in the in the database. You can go ahead and do it. So whatever work you're doing from the catch block, the same code can be executed from this error page. And how to say that it's an error page? Uh, if the error page is equal to attribute is true at the top, all right. Sorry, is error page attribute is true at the top, then you can use it. And apart from exception, we have other implicit objects as well, which I have listed here. And this is not page context R. It's just context. It's a spelling mistake from my side. So coming below, so we will deal one by one with all the implicit objects which are there, so that you have an understanding of what all things are available to you for working. So one is application implicit object, and this represents a JavaX.servlet or servlet context class. Again, this denotes the configuration which is done on the web application level. So if you have context hyphen param, that data is available to this JavaX.servlet or servlet context object. Okay, so this is used to get the context information and attributes in a JSP. Okay, and there are various ways to use it. If the request dispatcher object is out there, take is servlets, you can access it from here. All right. Now coming back to config implicit object. So we had application here, you see. Then the next one was config, then exception, then out. So if config denotes JavaX.servlet or servlet config, and if you remember, this has initialization parameters available. So if you see the web.xml and you had init hyphen param tag, so that tag is like available in the servlet via get servlet config API call. The servlet config object as such holds a reference to that particular to those particular data, and in JSP it's available via config object. Okay. So this is used to get the JSP init params configured in the deployment descriptor. Now coming back to exception implicit object, this is what we already discussed. This represents the following class java dot, and it's not land, it's lang. It's mistake from my side. Java.land lang.throwable. This is used to provide exception details in the JSP error pages. We can't use this object in normal JSP pages, and is available only in JSP error pages. Okay, and this is what we discussed as well. Then you have out. So if you have design and if you have worked offline on the servlet to understand the situation in a better way, you would have got a sense that whenever you have to send a response back to the end user, you can use out.println and then give the details within the double quotes, and that gets sent back to the end user. Okay, so how to out is nothing but a sort of writer which is used to write the response back in the stream which is being sent. So that out object is denoted in the GSP world using this OUT. So you don't have to create this object; it is available to you. You can directly go ahead and start using it. Okay, and this object is of the type javax.servlet.jsp.jsp writer. So this is used to send the response back to the client. And then you have page implicit object, okay, which denotes the page on which you're working on. Then you have session implicit object, which is a same session, which it denotes a session, HTTP session object, and it is the same session which the request belongs to. So if you have set any attribute in the session, you want to remove any attribute from the session, or you want to check whether this is a valid session or not, and thereby you want to check some attributes if they are set in the session or not. Go ahead and do it. I mean, it's when it's available for you to use. So that is the session. Then you have, if you remember, the servlet code. The servlet code had one service method, and that service method used to forward the request to either do get, do post, do put, do delete, and from there we had two parameters in the input. One was HTTP servlet request, and the other one was HTTP servlet response. So both were available. So you used to get details from the request to work on it, and if something has to be reset, if something has to be set back, you put it in the HTTP servlet response. So that's how it used to work. So response, this is the type javax.servlet.http.http servlet response. This is used to represent a response object uh, of HTTP servlet response that is used to send an HTML output to the client. Now again, request is there for, which is used for the same reason. So you have response object available, like the way in which you have available in the JSP service, right? So the same thing is available here. You can directly go ahead and use RESPONSE with R in small, and similarly with request. So these things are available to you. They denote HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, and they're available for you. So you can go ahead and start using it if you're writing a JSP page. And page context is another type of implicit object which is represented using javax.servlet.jsp.pageContext object, and this represents the page context for a JSP page. Now let's see an example here to understand the various things which we discussed. Okay, so this is a typical JSP page, and we're trying to use most of the implicit objects which we have discussed before, so that you have an idea as to how all of them fit together. So let's see here. Till here, hi there, bye there, they're just normal stuff. Note the page level directive which we're using. This class needed the import statement, so we've included page import and given the package name to the class, and whether it is which language it has to use, what is the content type, if there is any encoding. So all those things there defined here. So page directive is used to define the page level settings, and they are defined at the top. Okay, and after that it is core HTML tags. Once you come below and see, you want to print the date, right? So printing anything on the console requires out. So out is there which you use to print out.print, and then you print the date. Alright, and then in the request object. So from the request object you get the header user-agent and display it. Okay, and then you have the response object. So response object, you are adding a cookie, because this cookie value you want to be there on the client PC just for session management, and just try to correlate. In the last session we discussed about session management using cookies, and this is how you set cookies in the response. And we're discussing config, right? So which represents servlet config object. So it denotes a section in the web.xml where you have init-param uh, tags, and those tags are available via config. Okay, so config.get init param, say user that is available, what is the value which will be displayed to you. And anything if you put in the application which denotes the servlet context, which is at the web.xml level, not at a particular servlet level, that configuration also you can retrieve. Okay, and section, I'm just displaying section will get ID here, but you can check any attribute which is present. This example is just to show you how to use all these various attributes. Okay, now coming below, so the page.get class. So here we are using the page implicit object. Here we are using the page context implicit object. So all these things are available for you to have a look at, and this is how we use it. Now coming back to web.xml. So if you notice here, again, I mean, I'll repeat some of the stuff which we discussed here. This is a very important file in case of web application, and this is how you denote it. So web app is a starting tag. Then you have the display name, which means that what this display, what you want to display at the, I think at the top. Then you have the welcome file list, which means that if you do not give any particular servlet name, then what page should be rendered. So that page has to be defined here, that which is a welcome file, and you can define number of items here. So like it will be taken, I think, one by one or something of that sort. And then this is a context param which denotes the servlet context, and here you see the details here. It is denoted by the application implicit object, and we are trying to retrieve the value which you are setting out in this web.xml file. Alright, and then you have the servlet definition. The servlet definition has a name, the JSP file. So once you write this JSP file, what it means is that once you try to access, say slash home, and for this particular mapping, you find the servlet name, and the class is not mentioned here. If you see servlet name and servlet class is always mentioned, the servlet class is not mentioned, and you see that the JSP file is there, it typically means that this JSP file has to be rendered. There is no other job which had to be done by servlets, and that's or any particular class, and that's it is not specifically defined. Okay, and this init param is the servlet config object, which is represented by config, and then you have the mapping. So this is how your web.xml looks. And as I told before, so the JSP is compiled into servlet. I have just given it out here a peek of how it looks on the server side. You don't have to look into it or do any sort of debugging using it, but I'm just mentioning it here for your familiarity, so you're aware of what all things or how it appears. Okay, so this is the generated code. Now coming back to JSP actions. So there are some other stuff which are known as JSP actions. So JSP actions are used to perform tasks. So you say if you want to insert a file, use a bean, forward the request to another user, or instantiate objects, you have JSP actions for this. And the way to do this is JSP colon and give the name of the attribute, and then you can use that particular JSP action. So some of the common JSP actions are listed below. One is JSP colon include, which is used to include a file at the time the page is requested. So if you remember the include directive, that is used to include the file at the time of compilation, and that is only at the start, right? So if you include the file, it gets inserted at the start, and then you have other pieces of code. Okay, but in this particular case, you include the file at the time the page is requested, not at the compilation time, not like at the top. You can insert it wherever you want, and for that you use JSP colon include directive. Okay, JSP colon include action. Then you have JSP colon use bean, which instantiates the Java bean. It's basically a Pojo, a pure old Java object. So if you require Pojo reference, you have such objects which holds the data. You can go ahead and use it. And to set values from this Pojo class, this bean class, you can use set property, JSP colon set property, or you can use JSP colon get property. Now, to forward the request to another user or to a new page, you use JSP colon forward. And then you have JSP colon plugin, like say if you have some applet code, etc., to be run, some browser specific code, you can put it within JSP colon plugin. Then you have JSP colon element, which is used to define the XML elements, and JSP colon attributes. Some XML elements attribute you can define. Then you can define the body of the XML. So all these things are available for you, the JSP actions for performing the work. And trust me, there are many more JSP actions, and depending on you use, you can find the usage. Otherwise, it's not required to know in detail about each one of them. So till now in my career, I have not used say JSP colon plugin and all. I know it theoretically, but never used it. So it depends on the use. Whatever you use on a daily basis is what you will be there in your mind. Otherwise, you can go ahead and always find about it, reread stuff. Okay. Now there are two, when the attributes are defined, there's some elements along with those attributes. One is the ID attribute, okay, which is used to uniquely identify the particular attribute, and then you have the scope attribute, where it defines the scope of the element, the scope of the action element, and the four possible scopes are that this action, this JSP action is available only within a request, or it may be available within within the session, or within this application, entire application, or on this particular page only. So there are four possible values which Java gives, and if you try to access those actions outside these scopes, it's not going to work out. Okay, you will get exceptions. So you need to know that these are the four possible values. And once you see an example, such things will become clear. So let's see some of the common JSP actions which we have. So this is how we include a page. JSP colon include page is relative URL. Whatever the URL which you give, and then some other attributes. Okay. Then you have JSP colon use bean. which you use to find the Pojo class which I was talking about, using the ID and the scope variables. But if the object is not found, the GSP couldn't use bean action as such is very versatile. It will go out and try to find the bean if it is not available. And when I say bean, it's just a Pojo class, pure old Java object. It tries to find the bean, and if it doesn't get it, tries to create the object. So it is very versatile. So in the most of the places you will not use even other beans, it will try to use it. It tries to search for the object. If not, it tries to create it. Okay. So once a bean is loaded, this is how you load it. Say GSP colon use bean. You give the ID of the bean and the class. Okay. And then you have set property and get property APIs. So here if you see, once you open GSP colon use bean, you give ID, my name, and then set the property. So there are two ways to set property if you see. This is one way where the use bean tag has ended, and then you give the JSP colon set property. So whatever was the immediate JSP colon use bean before it, the compiler, it takes that particular bean to use to set this property. Okay. Or the other way is that you have JSP colon use bean, within that only you define the property. Okay. So there's a slight difference. I mean, if you see, there are two ways, but there is a slight difference between the way in which these things are invoked. So whenever a JSP page is loaded, so this thing, I mean, whatever you write outside the JSP colon use bean tag will be invoked every time. Every time you ask for that particular JSP. But if you write it within this tag, this will only get executed once when the JSP is being compiled. It will not get executed again and again. So there is a subtle difference, which and depends on what you want. Correspondingly, you can go ahead and set the values. Okay. Now to use a get property, again you use a bean and then you give the use bean and you have to end the tag, and you give the name where you want to store the value and the property from this particular bean which you need. So the bean name etc. doesn't have to be given here. Whatever is the use bean defined just one above, that is the one which gets used. Okay. Now the bean file is the test bean. Define the message, we define get message, set message, and then define the JSP. So if you see the JSP, what we're doing here is we are trying to find for a particular bean. So the bean is with the ID test, and this is the class of the bean. Now the first time when this JSP would be loaded, you won't be having this bean, right? So the JSP will use bean code will not be able to find the details, and if it is not able to find the details, it will go ahead and create the test bean object. So it creates a test bean object. So once the test bean object is created, it will be just by default constructor, right? So in that case, you don't have the message set. So if you want to set a message, you use the set property action, which is JSP action, which we were discussing before, all right? And you can see that the name is test, and the name is just for the property. I mean just the name of this particular thing. ID, I mean where you want to set. And then you set the property, which is the property name, which is out here, the message, and then the value, like what value should be out there. Okay, so this is how you set a property, and if you want to retrieve that property, you give the name of the bean, the ID of the bean, and the property which you want to retrieve. So this is how you can retrieve the value which is set. The other example is JSP colon forward. So JSP colon forward, if you give from wherever in the JSP, it forwards the request to the JSP name where you have written the other code. So whatever is out there in the current JSP, that execution will stop, and the request will directly move to the new JSP. And this is how your entire thing will look like. Okay. So this was all about JSP. Still I have not given questions because I want you to go ahead and read about all this stuff, and the questions will come when you have the servlet JSP and you define when you work on one mini MVC project, and then we'll have all these questions defined so that you can go ahead and use it to create small web applications, or for some theoretical questions will also be out there. So this is what we had today for JSPs. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask.